What most people do not understand about trauma is this: it does not only leave scars, it changes the way a person sees the world. And once you understand that, everything starts to look different. A trauma born empath does not move through life like everyone else. They are always watching, always noticing, always reading the hidden meaning behind every word and action. Why? Because at one point in life, this skill was not a choice, it was survival. When someone grows up in a place where emotions change like storms, where peace can turn into chaos without warning, the brain learns to adapt. It becomes sharp. It starts noticing tiny facial changes, small shifts in tone, and the gap between what people say and what they truly mean. This is not overthinking. This is a survival skill built under pressure. And with time, that skill becomes stronger than most people can imagine. They can walk into a room and feel tension before anyone speaks. They can sense pain hiding behind a smile, anger hiding behind politeness, fear hiding behind confidence. It is not magic. It is the result of a trained mind mixed with deep emotional awareness. But here is where people get it wrong. From the outside, this person looks too sensitive, too emotional, too reactive, someone who takes everything personally. But that view misses the truth completely. They are not reacting more. They are noticing more. There is a huge difference. Most people hear words. A trauma-born empath hears the silence between them. They notice what is said, what is avoided, and what is secretly being shown. They are processing layers while everyone else only sees the surface. And that is where the heavy price appears. Because when you do not just notice emotions, but absorb them, life becomes exhausting. Someone else's stress becomes your tension. Someone else's anger becomes your discomfort. Someone else's sadness becomes a weight on your shoulders. Carry that long enough, and the soul begins to feel tired. Over time, they start predicting problems before they happen. They change their own behavior to keep peace. They avoid conflict. They try to control the emotional atmosphere around them. They become masters at adapting, while taking responsibility for things that were never theirs to carry. That is why many trauma-born empaths grow into adults who seem wise and calm on the outside, but secretly feel drained inside. They learned how to manage everyone else, while losing touch with themselves. But here comes the twist few people ever realize. The same thing that overwhelms them is also their greatest power. Their ability to read people, understand motives, and notice emotional patterns can become a gift, a dangerous gift, but only when it is guided instead of swallowed. Everything changes when they learn one skill: to observe without absorbing. Then sensitivity becomes precision. Then emotion becomes clarity. Then awareness becomes control. The real problem was never that they felt too much. The real problem was that no one ever taught them where to stop feeling. And once you understand that, the next mystery becomes clear. What looks like withdrawal is often protection. For a trauma-born empath, being alone is not loneliness. It is peace. It is freedom from emotional noise. It is the one place where they do not need to decode faces, manage moods, or carry invisible tension. After years of doing that without rest, silence does not feel empty. It feels like relief. But people misunderstand it again. They think someone who spends time alone must be broken, distant, or avoiding life. The truth is often the complete opposite. They are healing. They are resetting. They are giving their nervous system a chance to breathe after living in constant alert mode. Because here is the truth most people never think about. Connection only feels good when it feels safe. If your past taught you that closeness brings chaos, emotional ups and downs, or hidden demands, then your mind stops seeing connection as comfort. It starts seeing it as danger. And once that happens, everything changes. So you adapt. You begin choosing places and people where you can control what enters your life. You become careful with who you allow near you. You limit your exposure. Not because you hate people, but because you learn something many never do. Not every energy is harmless. Some people drain you, some disturb your peace, some pull you back into painful patterns you fought hard to escape. And slowly, being alone starts to feel different. It feels clear. It feels stable. It feels like finally meeting yourself without outside noise shaping who you are. But here is the hidden struggle. The same person who finds peace in solitude is also built for deep connection. They do not want shallow talk. They do not want fake smiles or empty conversations. They want something real, something honest, something where they do not have to shrink themselves or manage everyone else's emotions. And that creates a painful paradox. They deeply want connection, but they have seen the price of the wrong kind. So instead of chasing more people, they become more selective. And when others do not understand that, they call them distant, guarded, hard to reach. But it is not distance. It is discernment. They are not shutting people out. They are shutting chaos out. And if no one understands that difference, pressure begins. Pressure from others, and sometimes pressure from within. Pressure to return to draining dynamics. Pressure to accept what feels familiar, even if it hurts. Pressure to trade peace for company. This is where many become trapped, because solitude can heal you, but if left unchecked, it can also become a prison. What began as recovery can slowly turn into isolation, and escaping that trap requires a skill many trauma-born empaths were never taught: how to be with people without losing themselves, how to stay present without absorbing everything, how to connect without giving too much, how to remain open without breaking their own boundaries. That is the real challenge. The goal was never to avoid people. The goal was to find the right people, without paying the same emotional cost. Once that truth becomes clear, solitude stops being an escape. It becomes a standard. Because peace should not be something you only feel when you are alone. It should stay with you, no matter who stands beside you. And once you understand how awareness and solitude shape them, another truth appears. Most people are not ready to meet them at that depth. This is where relationships begin to crack. A trauma-born empath does not only hear words, they study alignment. They notice when someone says the right thing, but something feels wrong. They sense hesitation. They detect avoidance. They catch contradictions hidden in plain sight. Without trying, they notice the gap between who someone pretends to be and who they really are. For many people, that kind of perception feels uncomfortable, even threatening, not because the empath is attacking them, but because their presence alone exposes what is shallow. Masks become harder to wear around someone who naturally sees beneath them. And most people, whether they admit it or not, depend on masks to move through life. So what happens next? Instead of stepping deeper, they step back. They call the empath intense, too serious, overthinking, too much. These labels may sound harmless, but they reveal everything. Because the real issue is not that the empath is flawed. The real issue is mismatch. One person is living on the surface. The other is seeing many layers at once. And unless both people are willing to meet halfway, that distance grows wider. This is why trauma-born empaths often repeat the same painful cycle. They connect fast, not because they are reckless, but because they recognize emotional patterns quickly. They sense meaning. They see depth. They notice potential. But with time, they also see the truth. They notice inconsistency, emotional limits, avoidance, unwillingness to grow. And once they see it, the bond starts to feel uneven. They are giving from a level the other person was never prepared to maintain. Now here is the part most people miss. The problem was never that the empath was too much. The real problem is that depth requires capacity, and not everyone has it. Not everyone has the emotional awareness, honesty, or inner stability to live at that level for long, and that is where the next truth appears. Instead of rising to meet that depth, many people step away. They create distance, they pull back, they slowly lower the intensity of the connection, not because it means nothing, but because real depth forces people to face parts of themselves they may not be ready to confront. And for the empath, this can feel confusing at first. From their side, nothing changed. They are still present, still honest, still observant, still consistent. So why does the connection fade? Because what they are meeting is not rejection. It is the limit of the other person's emotional capacity. And when that truth becomes clear, confusion starts to disappear. They begin to understand that not every connection is meant to last, not because it had no value, but because it had no alignment. That realization changes everything. They stop shrinking themselves to make others comfortable. They stop watering down their depth so it can be easier to consume. They stop translating their truth into something smaller, because depth was never the problem. misalignment was. And the sooner they understand that, the sooner they stop chasing bonds that were never built to hold them. Because here is the reality few people admit. Not everyone leaves because you are too much. Some people leave because they are not enough for the level you live on. But once you see this pattern clearly, heightened awareness, selective solitude, repeated mismatch in relationships, another danger appears, and this one does not come from outside. It comes from within. Over time, a trauma-born empath can become so skilled at understanding everyone else that they slowly lose understanding of themselves. Think about the conditioning behind it. When you spend years reading emotional rooms, predicting reactions, adjusting yourself to keep peace, your attention always points outward. You become an expert in other people's moods, needs, and motives. But that same attention is rarely turned inward, and that creates a silent imbalance. You begin tolerating things you should never accept, not because you are weak, but because you understand too much. You can explain why someone acts that way. You can trace their pain, their wounds, their history, their fears. And while that insight may be true, it becomes dangerous when it starts replacing your boundaries. Because understanding someone is not the same as excusing them. Yet many trauma-born empaths blur that line. They stay longer than they should. They give more than they receive. They carry emotional weight that never belonged to them, and they do it quietly, often without conflict, often without protest, because somewhere deep inside they learned that keeping harmony felt safer than disturbing it. This is where self-abandonment begins, not in one dramatic moment, but in tiny choices, a compromise here, silence there, a small excuse repeated again and again. Each moment feels harmless alone, but over time, they stack like stones, until one day, the empath looks around and realizes something painful. They built relationships where they are fully present for everyone else, but almost absent from themselves. That is the real danger, not caring too much, not feeling too deeply, but doing it without protection, without structure, without knowing where they end and another person begins. Because empathy without boundaries does not just connect you to people, it traps you inside them. And once that becomes a habit, responsibility gets distorted. You start managing emotions that are not yours, fixing problems that are not yours, carrying burdens no one gave you. Then comes the turning point. Everything changes the moment they stop asking, "What does this person need from me?" and start asking, "What is this costing me?" That single question can shake an entire life awake, because it brings attention back home. It builds a boundary where none existed. It separates compassion from compliance. And this is where the rare few rise. They do not lose empathy. They sharpen it. They learn to observe without absorbing, to understand without overgiving, to care without sacrificing their own peace. They stop trying to become everything for everyone and start becoming responsible to themselves. Because in the end, the mission was never to disconnect from others. It was to reconnect with themselves, without needing self-sacrifice to keep love alive. And once that line is finally drawn, everything changes, because empathy is only a gift when it includes you.